By the time the third complaint reached the wildlife office, the crocodile had a name. Locals called him the Brawler. He had been that big croc in the cove for years, a shape on the far bank, a ripple near the reeds, a pair of eyes at dusk. Fishermen had seen him glide parallel to their boats, at a respectful distance. Bird watchers had caught his outline in the shallows under their binoculars and turned the pages in their notebooks with the satisfaction of adding one more species to a list. No one called him aggressive then. That word arrived later, printed neatly in the comment section of an incident form from a lakeside resort. Aggressive behavior from large crocodile near buoy line. Repeated charges toward swimmers. Recommend removal for visitor safety. The line sat under the fluorescent lights on a desk for half a day before anyone did more than skim it. The resort sent a lot of notes. Noise complaints. Litter complaints. Complain about birds that stole food and monkeys that stole everything else. The second report came from a different direction. Diver training interrupted by crocodile. Animal repeatedly approaches and forces team to retreat. Behavior unusual. Request guidance. The third report included a shaky phone video taken from a paddleboard. The clip began with water and sky and the faint outline of red buoys marking the safe swim zone near the resort's main beach. A voice, breathing hard, narrated in the background. Somewhere on the far right, close to the limit of the frame, a broad V-shaped wake moved through the water with deliberate speed. The camera swung too fast, smearing light and color, then steadied. The crocodile surfaced, close enough now that the shape of the head was clear, heavy, ridged. Eyes above the waterline, fixed on something just out of the frame. It held that position for a heartbeat, then surged forward, throwing a low wave before it and snapping up short of an invisible point. It stopped there. No bite, no tail lash. No attack on the board. It turned sharply, rolled its body with a powerful twist, and disappeared again, leaving turbulence tracing a line. The paddleboarders' curses blurred into breathless laughter. The video ended as the view jerked back toward the beach. Somewhere under the sound, a pattern hid. At the regional wildlife office, a man whose job was to know crocodiles watched the footage twice more than he had to. He muted it on the third pass, eyes tracking only the movement of the body on the screen. It was not aimless. The animal's approach and stop were precise, as if in the water there were a mark only it could feel. The lake itself was young. It had been a river once, fast and shallow in some seasons, slow and broad in others. The dam had turned that movement into a deep, controlled reservoir. People called it a lake because lakes sounded peaceful and natural and safe. The concrete wall at the far end that held back the accumulated weight of water and silt did not fit easily into brochures. When the engineers had closed the last gates years earlier, the old river valley had drowned. Trees in the lower reaches had died standing, their branches becoming ghost forests below the surface. Structures the maps had not bothered to note, foundations, fence lines, the broken remains of a long-abandoned ferry landing, had gone under as well. The water rose until it found its new level, spreading into coves and inlets that developers quickly named and sold. The resort that now watched the brawler move back and forth at its buoy line stood on what used to be a bend in the river, where sandbars changed shape with each flood. Underneath, the past still sat. The people who monitored the dam worried about different invisible lines. They watched the changing temperature between the surface and the deep layers. They watched dissolved oxygen levels, which told them whether fish and other living things in the lower strata could breathe. They watched the slow accumulation of gas produced when trapped plants and mud rotted where no wind could stir them. In the right combination of heat, calm water, and decay, a quiet reservoir could become a bottle shaken too hard. Hydrogen sulfide, methane, and carbon dioxide learned to wait in the cold depths. If something disturbed the boundary between the deep layer and the upper one, a sudden turn of wind, a heavy rain, an ill-timed release from the dam, those gases could surge upward. Wave a match over such a place, and nothing might happen. Bend down to breathe too close to the water at the wrong moment, and you might not stand up again. Not many people in the resort brochures talked about that either. On the charts, the staff at the control room traced the line where warm surface water met the cooler depths, the thermocline. Below it, in some summers, instruments recorded another line where oxygen dwindled and the chemistry turned stranger. Most days, those lines stayed where they were supposed to be. On a few, they did not. The wildlife officer who watched the video did not see those graphs. He did not need to. His world was made of calls, patrols, and the behavior of bodies in water and on land. But he had walked the banks of the lake in other seasons. He had seen fish float dead in hidden coves when a pocket of bad water rolled up from below. He had heard of sudden silences where frogs and insects should have filled the air with sound. He had watched a cow stumble and go down after drinking from a patch where a thin film of bubbles had risen from cracks in the mud. When the resort called, they mentioned only danger to guests and bookings. When the dive school called, they mentioned only a problem with training. He thought of both and called the dam office. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman who knew the reservoir's moods through numbers rather than smells and sounds. She listened to his description of the crocodile that would not cross a certain invisible line near the buoy field, and of divers who complained that the animal lunged at them every time they tried to descend past a certain depth in that same cove. She did not say that it was probably just territorial behavior. Instead, she pulled up maps. The cove by the resort was not just a pretty curve of shoreline. It was also where one of the dam's older intake channels had once drawn water for an experimental turbine that was no longer in use. The pipes still lay there, embedded in the drowned slope, sealed and forgotten in the official sense, but not erased from physics. She thought of another line on another screen. In the last 2 warm seasons, a small anomaly had appeared in the data from the deepest station in that cove. Slightly lower oxygen profiles than in adjacent areas, slightly higher signs of decomposition, values still within tolerances, still easy to ignore when more pressing fluctuations occurred near the main dam wall. She had noted it once, filed it, and moved on. The call from the wildlife office pulled that memory back. "Send me the exact coordinates of where they see him turning," she said. The following week brought windless days. The lake's surface turned into a mirror. Sunlight soaked into the upper layer of water, heating it. Beneath it, the deeper, colder layer slumped, held in place by density and gravity. The boundary between them sharpened. In the cove, instructors from the dive school watched the glassy surface and cursed under their breath. They had chosen the resort bay because it offered a gentle entry for novices, predictable depths, and a short swim to a slope where more advanced students could practice drop-offs without leaving the shelter of the buoy lines. The crocodile changed that. He had not always lived in this exact corner. Older fishermen remembered a large male that favored the mouth of a small creek feeding the lake from the north. He took fish, the occasional stray goat, and once, many years ago, the carcass of a cow someone had dragged too close to the sludge at the edge. When the dam filled and shorelines changed, he adapted. Crocodiles understood depth and current with a precision that didn't need words. They felt the shapes of the bottom through their bodies. They knew where fish paused when they moved between light and dark water. They knew, without calling it chemistry, that some places were worth wading in, and others were not. The brawler had found an invisible wall in the cove. On the surface, nothing marked it. No change in color, no shift in the pattern of light. Underneath, there was a sharp step in the world. On one side, the water held enough oxygen to make it a highway for fish traveling between the shoreline and deeper feeding grounds. On the other, a thin, unstable layer of low-oxygen water clung to the slope, fed by seepage from buried organic matter in old pipes. Like a cloud lying along the bottom, its upper edge was a boundary as real to gills as a fence was to hooves. The crocodile hunted along that edge. He cruised just above the boundary where fish hesitated, disoriented by the changing conditions. For him, it was a rich line. For anything that breathed air at the surface, the danger lay in what could happen if that line moved. The dive school had learned his habits by accident. On the first few dives of the season, instructors noticed only a brief flash of scales or a ripple far away. The students were kept in the shallows, and the big reptile stayed at a polite distance, watching with the flat, ancient gaze of a creature that had seen many things moved into its world and had outlived most of them. The trouble started when the instructors led more confident divers toward the slope. At a particular point, where the drop-off began its steeper descent into the drowned river channel, the water temperature changed. Divers felt it as a sudden cold band across their cheeks and hands. Their computers showed the line in numbers. They were used to this. Thermoclines were part of the lake's personality. They were not used to a crocodile appearing out of the gloom every time they dropped their fins through that band. The animal did not attack them. He simply moved fast and straight, cutting across their path at the level of the line, mouth closed but body stiff, pushing a bow wave that made their masks and regulators vibrate. He held that barrier like a living gate, eyes fixed on the intruders until they retreated upslope back into warmer water. The first time, they surfaced and laughed about it, adrenaline making jokes. The second and third times, the instructors noticed something else. He always came at the same angle. He always stopped at the same depth. He never followed them all the way back up. He did not own the entire cove. He guarded a strip. When the resort management asked the wildlife office to remove the crocodile for the comfort of guests, they did not mention any of that. The man at the wildlife office took the call, wrote down the words, and asked for the dive school's number. Then he drove out to the lake. From the beach, everything looked like a poster. Children played in the shallows inside the buoy line. Paddleboards glided between floating platforms. Music drifted down from the bar on the hill. The red buoys marked off a rectangle of designated safety in the water. their line stopping a few meters short of where the slope fell away. A sign on the sand declared that the area was monitored and croc-free. He did not comment. Instead, he walked to the small building where the dive school kept its gear. The instructors had expected resistance. They had had it before from people who thought all crocodiles should be removed from all places that humans liked. When they saw who had stepped in from the harsh sunlight into their gear room, they relaxed a fraction. He listened to their account without interrupting. He asked where, exactly, the animal appeared. They pointed on a chart of the cove, a line running along the contour where the depth numbers changed more quickly, parallel to the buoy field. He watched their hands and nodded, an old map forming over a new one in his head. Later, from the deck of a small boat, he watched the same water with different eyes. They had chosen a day when the lake was calm. The sun's reflection burned a straight path from the hill to the far shore. Swimmers splashed inside their red rectangle. Outside it, the surface looked empty. The first sign of the brawler was not a sound. It was a line of barely perceptible ripples cutting across the glare. The crocodile surfaced just outside the buoy line, head and back showing, eyes and nostrils clear. He lay motionless for a moment, then slid forward until his snout touched the invisible extension of the line between the last two floats. He did not cross it. He turned and paralleled it, pacing the border like a dog respecting a fence only it could see. When some inexperienced swimmer kicked out too far toward the end of the rope, he angled his body, closing the gap and stopping again at the unseen threshold between them. The wildlife officer watched, the hair at the back of his neck stirring. He asked the diver beside him to drop a weighted line with depth markers where the crocodile had halted. The diver did. The weight sank, the rope slipped through calloused fingers, the marker tags slid past. 2 meters, 3, 4, 5. At 6, the line jerked slightly as the weight found the slope. The diver noted the depth. The officer marked the spot on his own map, then asked for one more favor. "Take a reading there," he said, "while he's watching." The diver smiled tightly and pulled a handheld probe from a sealed case. It was not as sophisticated as the instruments hanging in permanent moorings elsewhere, but it could still tell the difference between warm and cold, richer water and hungry water. He waded out just inside the buoy line, dropped beneath the surface, and swam toward the marker, the probe tethered to his wrist by a bright cord. The crocodile sank. On the boat, the officer watched his shadow move beneath the surface. It stopped and turned just as the diver approached the invisible band only he and the instruments would notice. For a long second, they hovered near the same depth, separated by a few meters of water and a nervous rope. The brawler held his place. When the diver's hand drifted lower, the crocodile shot forward in a short, controlled rush, body rigid, water tearing away from his snout. The diver felt the pressure wave slam into his chest. He retreated instinctively, kicking back toward the brighter, warmer layer. The probe recorded numbers as it moved. On deck, the small screen told its story. Temperature drop, oxygen fall, a sudden change at nearly the exact depth where crocodile and human had met. Later, when samples from that layer passed through the instruments at the dam's lab, another story unfolded. There was nothing cartoonishly dramatic, no glowing sludge, no neon film, There was simply too little oxygen and too much of what lay under it. Dissolved gases from the rotting mass of trees and soil on the old riverbed, trapped for years and now nudging upward. In some pockets, hydrogen sulfide levels flirted with the threshold where a sudden release could blanket the surface with a toxic, invisible cloud. Most days, wind mixed the upper layer enough to disperse small burps. On windless days, in sheltered coves like the resort's bay, the line between safe and unstable grew sharper. Fish felt it. They avoided certain depths. The crocodile had learned to hunt at that boundary. Whether he understood the deep cause did not matter. He knew that beyond a certain point, the world changed in a way his body did not accept, and he treated that place as a wall. The dam's hydrologist, standing on the same boat deck a few days later, watched the probe's graphs and felt a knot form under her ribs. The anomaly she had once filed away in a folder now had weight. The old sealed intake channel beneath the slope had not been as sealed as the reports said. A faint flow of colder, oxygen-poor water from deeper layers had been sliding up along the drowned riverbed there, a tilted funnel for everything that decomposed in the dark. Under normal conditions, it was a slow leak of problem into normal. Under the wrong conditions, it could have become a throat. Her mind went quickly through scenarios. A sudden drop in air pressure and temperature with an incoming storm turning the layer. A hurried release from the dam to handle heavy rain upstream, pulling deep water up and over the lip. People swimming above a place where gas had just decided to try the air. Bodies heavier than the water they breathed in did not float. The resort, in their letters, had wanted the crocodile gone. The hydrologist's first instinct, shared silently with the wildlife officer beside her, was the opposite. For weeks, perhaps months, the brawler had been an ungentle fence. He had forced divers and adventurous swimmers to retreat from the line he patrolled. He had turned paddleboards back toward the buoys with short, shocking rushes that left people telling stories about the aggressive crocodile over dinner, unaware that their excitement had replaced something else that might have happened if they had dropped over the edge and lingered. Removing him would not remove the line he guarded. The people on the boat did not make policy, but they could write reports. They did. In the pages that followed, the word aggressive appeared only in quotes, bracketed by explanations. Data from probes and lab tests sat alongside maps of the old river channel and the forgotten intake. Photographs of the crocodile's patrol pattern traced arcs along the thermocline's curve. A recommendation took shape. Adjust release schedules to reduce the buildup of low-oxygen, gas-rich water in that sector. Move the buoy line shoreward, out of the cove where the slope fell fastest. Prohibit deep diving there during peak stratification periods. Increase mixing in the bay with controlled surface agitation. And, tucked into the middle of the text, like an odd guest at a formal dinner, do not attempt to remove or kill the resident crocodile at this time. His presence currently acts as an effective deterrent, preventing repeated incursions by swimmers and divers into the identified risk zone. At the resort, the manager read that paragraph twice, lips thinning. Then he read the legal addendum attached by the dam's compliance office, and his expression changed. Liability had its own language. Until mitigation is complete, it said in essence, the risk zone under that part of the cove is considered unsuitable for supervised recreation. Any removal of existing natural deterrents should be preceded by installation of physical barriers and additional monitoring. The manager did not love crocodiles, but he loved lawsuits less. The sign on the beach changed. The red buoys came closer, shortening the safe swim area. A second rope appeared further out, festooned with small flags and notices warning away recreational craft. The dive school shifted its training to another part of the lake, where the bottom contour was kinder and the chemistry less capricious. Guests complained for a while about the smaller rectangle. Then they adjusted. On calm days, if you looked beyond the new ropes, you could still see a broad, dark shape moving slowly along an invisible curve. The brawler continued his patrol. He did not know that engineers had increased aeration in the bay through discrete surface pumps camouflaged as floating platforms. He did not know that sensors now monitored the deep layer beneath his line more closely than before. He knew only that fish continued to stack up where the world changed, and that his instincts still told him not to cross. Months later, after a season of careful releases and adjustments, the graphs in the control room looked better. The oxygen deficit in the cove's deep pocket eased. Gas concentrations in the worst layer fell. The invisible wall softened, becoming less of a cliff and more of a slope. The hydrologist, cautious by vocation and experience, called for more time before declaring the problem solved. The wildlife officer, cautious for different reasons, continued to tell anyone who asked that the crocodile was not a nuisance, but a neighbor with clear boundaries. Occasionally, a new tourist would arrive, see the flags and signs, and ask why the authorities didn't just get rid of that dangerous animal. If they caught the right staff member on the right day, they would hear a version of the longer story. About the invisible lines inside the water and the thick, simple body that had drawn one on the surface for everyone to see, with muscle and teeth and sudden motion instead of ink. About divers who thought they were being challenged when, in fact, they were being turned away from a place that might have killed them in a slower, quieter way. There were no dramatic headlines, no sudden die-off of fish in the cove, no cluster of unexplained drownings in calm weather, no late-night evacuation of the resort because unseen gas had crept over the beach. Somewhere downstream, people drank water that was slightly safer because someone had paid attention to a crocodile's idea of a border. At the edge of the old river channel, under a sky that changed from steel to gold to black and back again, the brawler rested on a sandbar with only his eyes above the surface. Boats passed at a distance, their engines humming. He held his position at the edge of a world that his kind had known long before any dam, resort, or dive school existed, guarding a line that others had drawn without knowing it, and that he enforced without ever needing to understand what a test vial or a graph was. In the quiet stretch between storms, it was enough that he had been there, turning people back from a strip of water that wasn't what it seemed, until the humans who measured things realized why.